If you've ever shopped for watches on Amazon, you'll have noticed the tidal wave of weirdly named Chinese-made watches hitting the platform over the last couple of years. The space that used to be dominated by Casio, Citizen, and Seiko has been overrun by Bobo Bird, Biden, and Saab Bomber. No joke, that last one is apparently a real thing. This tsunami of has made it difficult to discern between the good and the garbage. Previously, you knew what to expect with prestigious, time-tested brands, but now it's a minefield. After all, Amazon reviews, often written by bots or people who've never owned a wristwatch, can be as reliable as a Lancia that's been driven off a cliff. So, to try and find out what the crack is, I've got my hands on a couple of watches from one of the most popular brands on Amazon, Stührling Original. This company frequently features in the Amazon's Choice and Bestseller sections online, and they've got tons of 5-star reviews as well, meaning they've got to be at least half decent, right? Well, thanks to Amazon, there's no need to speculate. They covered the cost of 2 of these for review purposes, so thanks to them. They're both affiliate linked in the video description, as well as some alternatives. By the end of this video, you'll know if I think they're worth buying and how they compare to similar offerings from other brands. The brand. Who exactly are you buying from then? According to their website, this brand dates back to 2002. So they predate most of the micro brands I mentioned at the start. It's promising that they're still in business 20 years later. Nevertheless, they showcase much of the same cheesiness as a variety of subpar brands I've covered before. Firstly, they've got an overwhelming number of discounts on just the first page of their website alone. Not only is there a buy one get one half price offer at the moment, but there's also a 10% newsletter sign-up discount on top of 25% off the Aquadiver range and up to 68% off some of the watches too. Surely there's some combination that gets you a free watch, eh? Lots of discounts may seem pro-consumer on the surface, but in all seriousness, if a brand has to discount all their products to draw your interest, it's because they don't command their RRP. Take their special reserve watch for instance, which is supposedly new, but is instantly discounted by 68%. The brand also uses much of the formulaic fashion brand rhetoric we've seen before. This includes the rags to riches founder backstory, the groundbreaking innovation that's changed the watch industry, the obscure connections to well-known brands that have got nothing to do with watchmaking, and the recurring claims of craftsmanship and quality. At one point, they boast that the founder could have sold out and used beautiful people and places to sell his watches, but instead chose to let the products speak for themselves. That's honourable, but also surprising, considering that 2 good-looking models appear when you scroll down the same page. I think whoever wrote this also needs to get in touch with the Stührling Instagram team, as they don't seem to have got the message either. I better not forget the ever-popular magazine mentions, where clueless individuals who've never touched the watches shield them harder than the airheads on QVC. I'd recommend completely ignoring appraisals by garbage sites like these. Now, I will say up front, I am a little biased here. I do have my own website where we review watches and stuff, so technically it is kind of like competition in a way. But when you read their coverage, you'll quickly see all the telltale signs mentioned in my shady reviews video, indicating that most of their posts are more like adverts in disguise. I'm not implying that Stührling has paid these people, though it's not beyond the realms of possibility. Rather, the recommendations from these sites in general don't hold much water. The company itself is named after master watchmaker Max Stührling, who supposedly operated in Switzerland in the late 1800s. I say supposedly because I can't find any credible information about this guy online. The only details available are a few sentences from the Stührling brand themselves, and most third-party web pages are using Stührling's website as their only reference. You'd think a legendary Swiss master watchmaker would have a cult following online, but apparently not. Perhaps he was friends with the intriguing British gentleman Daniel Wellington. Who knows? If only Mr. Stührling had used Watch Crunch, he might have garnered a following. That's because Watch Crunch is basically the mecca for wristwatch lovers like you and me. It was made by fellow watch nerds who grew tired of the negativity and flex culture on existing platforms. You know the ones I'm talking about. They wanted to create something more friendly and unique, and I think they've achieved it. On watchcrunch.com, you'll find all of your favourite watch content arranged into bite-sized chunks. Not only can you post about your current daily driver, but you can discover what's on the wrist of people around the globe. Struggling to choose between 2 watches or multiple versions of the same one? Use the new polls feature to receive quick input from other community members to help you make the right decision. If you want to stay in the loop, it's also worth checking out the news tab, where the latest releases and stories from the watch world are compiled into one easily digestible list. You can even start discussions about the articles that interest you the most in just one click. I recently posted to WatchCrunch asking some questions about the movements inside these Stührling watches, which we'll discover later. I quickly got some great responses from members of the community, which helped to construct this video. Join for free with the link in the video description and start collecting your exclusive badges today. Thanks to watchcrunch.com for sponsoring this video. I'm not gonna lie, alarm bells immediately sounded when unboxing these two. Both arrived in pretty elaborate boxes, which is uncommon at a price point accustomed to rudimentary housing. While this does make them friendlier for gifting, it also raises some questions. When targeting such a low retail price, is it cost effective to blow so much on a box that will end up in the bin? I mean, wouldn't it make sense to put your limited resources into making the watch as good as possible? Unfortunately, over the years, I've noticed a negative correlation between the fanciness of the packaging and the product's quality. After all, how many Casios have you seen arrive in a decorative chest? Still, I'm prepared to be proven wrong. Some lesser-known brands, like Boulder for instance, have delivered extreme value in the past. If there's another to add to that list, it's a win-win. Here are the pair I'll be pondering over. The Diver was listed as the 792 series on Amazon, though the listing has since changed, but this one's called the Aquadiver 3950 on the Stuhrling website, with the nickname Depthmaster present on the dial. The skeleton model goes by the codename 3933, and is called the Winchester, though I'm not sure what it has to do with a small city in Hampshire. The former retails for around $75, while the latter hovers between $100 and $150 on grey market sites like Amazon, so both are usually quite affordable. That's despite them having supposed MSRPs of $795 and $1,250. So thanks to Amazon's naming mistake, I've made a slight error here. I took the $1,250 MSRP from the 792, which is what it was listed as on Amazon. It turns out that figure is for the automatic. The quartz MSRP is still an eye-watering $475. That means Stuhrling thinks a $50 Miyota 8215 and proprietary end links that prevent strap changes justify an $800 MSRP increase. Either way, it doesn't change my conclusion. I think someone at Stuhrling forgot the meaning of MSRP, as they, the manufacturer, aren't selling their watches for anywhere near the retail prices they recommend. It's almost like these figures are entirely made up, eh? Okay, let's talk about sizing. Both are on the larger side. The Aquadiver is 42.7mm wide, with a lug-to-lug of 50.2mm and a thickness of 13mm. When including the male bracelet end links, the effective height increases to 55.8mm, which is rather unwieldy for average and smaller arms. The Winchester is marginally more petite, with a 41.7mm diameter, a 13.7mm thickness, and a more palatable 48mm lug-to-lug. Average 7-inch wrists can probably just about pull that one off. Case construction and finishing. Outside of the packaging, the first thing I immediately noticed was the finishing, and I noticed it for all the wrong reasons. Both watches have this glossy finish that looks just like chromed brass. For those of you newer to watches, chromed brass is essentially a lower grade material used in cheap watches to cut costs. It looks okay at first, but typically corrodes and degrades faster than the industry standard 316L stainless steel, which most watches use from about $40 or $60 and upwards. Oddly, neither Amazon nor the Stuhrling website lists the case material for either watch. The Diver reportedly has a steel case back, but aside from that, you've only got the stainless steel stamp on the rear to go off. I'm inclined to believe that the Diver probably is steel as it's appropriately weighty and it's cold to the touch. The Winchester, on the other hand, is far more sketchy. It's suspiciously lightweight for an automatic metal watch of this size, at a measly 72 grams, making it lighter than some quartz titanium watches I've reviewed previously. And that's not as good as it sounds. While it feels quite comfy on the wrist, it also feels extremely cheap, and the weight savings likely come at the expense of performance and aesthetics. Skeletonized watches like this do use less materials, that's true. Still, the outer shell here is undeniably very thin, evident from the vast spaces around the edges. If you look closely, you'll notice that some of the innards are constructed of sloppily painted plastic, not metal. This includes the chapter ring, whose reflectivity doesn't match the rest of the watch. It looks like something you could win off a seaside arcade machine. The case is relatively warm to the touch compared to its contemporary as well, which is odd. I guess this is either an inferior grade of stainless steel as opposed to 316L, neither of which are acceptable for a watch at this price point, let alone the outrageously inflated MSRP. I could be wrong though, as I'm not an expert in that field. Metallurgy aside, both watches still look second rate. The Aquadiver strongly reminds me of the Accurist that featured in my Watches Under 50 roundup, as the case finishing has many of the same characteristics. Both have that hazy sheen you find on lower end pieces, and each lack the clean, precisely cut edges of better quality watches. The rounded off corners used throughout are a dead giveaway. This shape is just easier to manufacture, which means it's cheaper to manufacture. The primary difference between these two is that the Stuhrling costs about twice as much, meaning the skimping is less forgivable. Look, it's not a disaster, but the similarly priced offerings from Invicta, Casio and Pagani Design all hammer Stuhrling in this category, with improved construction and finishing that's noticeable to the naked eye. It's also worth mentioning that the highly edited product shots aren't really that representative of the product in reality. Many of these renderings provide a higher quality look with sharper edges than on the real thing, which I think is quite misleading for prospective buyers. The bezel is more accurate though. It's misaligned both in the renderings and in real life, a match I was hoping wouldn't come to fruition. Much of the same can be said for the Winchester, only this time they've added a hideous coined edge to the outside. It's unnecessary and tacky, it feels over-designed, not much more needs to be said. I guess this could float your boat if you're after a over-the-top sort of maximalist watch. Regarding other specifications, both watches have reasonably secure screwed rears, each with a decent 100-meter water resistance rating. I'm still not sure I'd label a watch with this designation a depth master, as many similarly priced dive watches have double this score at 200 meters. Nevertheless, it's dependable enough for most aquatic scenarios, which is pleasing to see, as is the screw-down crown fitted to the diver for added security. When it comes to crystals, there's once again some confusion. On Amazon, both are described as having a Krysterna crystal, which is supported by the engravings on the back of the watches. Yet on the Stuhrling website, one is said to have a hardened mineral crystal, while the other has nothing mentioned whatsoever. If you've seen my watch glass guide video, you'll know that some brands essentially rebadge hardened mineral crystal with a buzzword of their choosing, to convince you that their material is somehow superior. I'm inclined to believe that's the case here too. Stuhrling may have a whole webpage touting the supposed benefits of Krysterna, or Krysterna, however you say it, and why it's better than sapphire, which is the go-to crystal used in most higher-end watches. However, on the same page, Stuhrling effectively admits that Krysterna is not as hard as sapphire when discussing the Vickers hardness rating. They've sneakily ordered this list so that Krysterna comes after sapphire. If you were skim reading this, you'd probably think that Krysterna ranks higher, as human nature expects lists like this to be in ascending order. It's the norm, isn't it? Well, they're relying on you misreading the greater than symbol, which reveals that the lower placed sapphire scores more than the 2000 rating of Krysterna. Realistically, sapphire should come after Krysterna in this list. Now that could be a mistake, but it could also be intentional. I'll be scratch testing this weird crystal alongside others soon to see which hold up to the hype. Make sure you subscribe for that one. To my knowledge, this Krysterna should perform similarly to Seiko's Hardlex or any other hardened mineral crystal. I mean, why else would someone call it by that name on a product listing if it was a different material altogether? Stuhrling says they only use Krysterna in their watches, so surely this can't have been a product-specific mix-up. I reckon it's more like a written version of a Freudian slip, and the writer simply forgot to use the gimmicky terminology. And that's partly because many users online have reported that Krysterna scratches pretty readily, unlike sapphire, which is unanimously known to be virtually scratch-proof, though it is slightly more susceptible to impact. I'm still excited to see if it lives up to the billing. Whether it's jargon or not, this material's still acceptable for watches at this price, and it should give better scratch resistance than just standard mineral. I just wish there wasn't all this pretentious bravado around it. It leaves a sour taste in my mouth. The aesthetic story is quite a short one. The dive watch is an enlarged Rolex Submariner ripoff, with an identical handset and marker arrangement. I don't think it's an ugly watch per se. After all, the Submariner is a very popular watch. It just means that this Aquadiver isn't original at all, despite the name. The red and black colour scheme works well, though the sunburst dial isn't nearly as prominent as in the stock images. In person, it looks like a plain matte finish 99% of the time, which is a shame. It does feature applied indices, which are reasonably well aligned and nice to see in a budget watch. The lume used is mediocre, even for the money, and fades quite quickly in low light, but at least the markers are clean and there's no sign of dust or dirt under the crystal to the naked eye. All text is printed, which is to be expected for a sub $100 watch. It would undoubtedly qualify as daylight robbery if this were anywhere near that $1,250 MSRP though. Basically, it's a bare bones watch, which is alright as long as you've spent a small amount of cash on it. Now, I'm not big into skeletonized watches, so I can't tell you if the Winchester is a copy of something else, though I do suspect it might be more original. The first thing that takes your eye is the logo. As is commonplace among skeleton watches, the text is inked on the crystal's underside, providing a cool hovering effect as you move it. Unfortunately, this illusion is shattered by the fact that the logo and lower text are significantly off-center and are tilted substantially clockwise. Imagine if you bought a watch and it turned up and the logo wasn't even right. It's probably the worst logo positioning I've encountered since starting this channel back in 2019, and it certainly doesn't leave a good first impression. It also gives credence to my theory that Stuhrling watches are fired off the production line as quickly as possible with minimal care or attention to detail. This watch should have never passed quality control checks, especially for a model with a supposed $795 MSRP. I'm sorry I keep coming back to that, but it's just ridiculous. A pleasing blue tone inhabits the hands. Disappointingly, they extend far past their respective markers, the opposite of the typical short handset problem that I often encounter. Nevertheless, at least they remain legible against the mesh of parts beneath. You'll generally have no trouble reading the time. To some people, especially those newer to watches, I'm sure the view of a mechanical movement of any sort will be impressive enough to convince them that they got a good deal, regardless of its quality. If this gets more people into the watch community, that's great. On closer inspection though, the mechanism really doesn't hold up well. The brushing atop it is possibly the roughest I've ever seen, with gaudy striations all across the surface. My expensive lighting setup makes this look much more appealing than in person. At this budget, I don't think brands should even attempt elaborate movement finishing, as it only yields crude results like this, but because it's a skeleton watch, I guess their hands were tied and they just had to go with this. The ugliness is hardly a surprise as both use bottom of the barrel movements. Within the Aquadiver is a Miyota 2315. This battery-powered ticker is on the lowest rung of the Miyota ladder and can be had for around $3 a pop, potentially far less if bought en masse. When I removed the rear, I discovered that this movement was also unadjusted. Unadjusted movements are those which apparently haven't been fine-tuned to keep the best possible time, which doesn't surprise me in the slightest. It's still a quartz watch, so does maintain reasonable accuracy. It's just another area where corners are being cut. It's not an awful choice, it's just definitely not luxury or anything like that. That fitted inside the Winchester is much more obscure. There's no information about this unmarked automatic caliber on the Stuhrling product page or on Amazon. On the back of the watch it says Yugu movement, whatever the hell that is. It's not a manufacturer I'm aware of, I'll tell you that much. I looked through other products on the Stuhrling website and tracked down some alternatives that used the same movement, or at least one that looked absolutely identical. Here Stuhrling claims that it's, in fact, an impeccable and potent in-house automatic movement. In-house as if Stuhrling is designing and manufacturing these from the ground up, rather than outsourcing their construction. While it does have a Stuhrling branded rotor, I couldn't help but notice the uncanny resemblance to the sea of skeleton watches on AliExpress. Most of these use crude, low-cost versions of the Chinese standard movement, aka the Tongji, hope I'm pronouncing that one right, which saw mass production in the 1970s and 80s. I've done some digging and I've got bad news for Stuhrling owners. It looks like you've been duped. At least if you bought a watch with this movement inside. I initially queried this on WatchCrunch, where a user pointed me towards the similar looking but hand-wound 2660S. After some browsing on that same site, I landed on this, the Hangzhou 2650 SSZ. According to William Ho of PTS Resources, the parent company of Hangzhou Watch Company, this modified Tongji movement has been in production since 2003. When looking at the pair side by side, as far as I can tell, the only perceivable differences are the blue screws and the lasered rotor. Well, Stuhrling dates back to 2002, I hear you say. What if this Hangzhou copied their design in 2003? Well, the Wayback Machine shows that in July 2003, the Stuhrling website wasn't even operational, with only a coming soon banner displayed on screen. Hangzhou Watch Company also doesn't seem to be owned by Stuhrling, as it was founded in 1972, predating the New York-based LLC by 30 years. So I don't see how it could qualify as an in-house movement by proxy. I then made an unusual discovery. I uncovered an article on europastar.com from 2009, where then CEO Yossi Gleiberman openly admitted that more than 50% of Stuhrling watches use Chinese movements from Seagull and Shanghai. If they've previously admitted to using off-the-shelf movements, why are they now claiming that these are in-house? Surely that must be false advertising. Perhaps some microscopic adjustments have been made so that these now qualify as in-house? If not, then Stuhrling is knowingly lying to consumers about the movements that they use in their watches. If coloured screws are the sole requirement to qualify as in-house, then tell you what, Spaghetti Scametti is going to sell out with its first collection. Shockingly, the legitimacy of the movement isn't the most pressing issue. You see, when manufacturing a movement with strict budget constraints, you have to make some sacrifices. For comparison, the controversial Miyota 8215, the one with the noisy rotor and the stuttering problems, costs about 3 times this Tongji. So what's the catch? Well, aside from lower quality control and questionable labour practices, take a listen to this. Yeah, the din produced by this Stuhrling is a one-way ticket to the asylum. It's by far and away the loudest I've ever featured, making the Timex Weekender look like a silent assassin in comparison. You can hear the tick across rooms and through headphones, while the rotor noise sounds like one of those clockwork pullback toys when it rotates. It's a total deal breaker, even considering the moderate price tag. When I'm reviewing watches, if I decide I want to take the watch off for whatever reason, I'll usually leave it on the desk so I can at least be around it and get even more of a feel for it. But this one, it was driving me and my wife nuts, like the horological equivalent of Chinese water torture. I've had to store it in its box in the next room, and as a result I've barely worn it. Thankfully, the Miyota and the dive watch is virtually silent, giving me some respite. Something I'm yet to touch on is the straps. The bracelet fitted to the Aquadiver isn't half bad. It's got solid links, including the end links, and has a functional clasp with 3 micro adjustment holes. The tone of the bracelet doesn't match well with the case at all, but at least it's competitive with others in its price range, and you should be able to find a comfortable fit. The leather band on the Winchester isn't so nice. It looks okay on the surface, but the quality is mediocre. I'd put it on par with those that came with the new Orient Bambino that I covered a few weeks ago, as it's stiff and plasticky. Ironically, those straps were the worst part of that watch, whereas they're probably the best part of this one. Before I give my final thoughts, I need to give you a word of warning. Please don't be fooled by the phony reviews that are particularly prevalent with this brand. These are slightly different from the media appearances I talked about earlier. Instead, these are written by people posing as independent reviewers who, again, have never handled these watches and are just after quick commissions. You can identify these by their exclusive use of stock images across their whole website and the complete lack of user-generated photos. Most of these contain false information, and some even compare Stuhrling watches to luxury brands, a comparison that an infant would probably scoff at if they experienced these in the flesh. I think some of Stuhrling's popularity on Amazon is because they put more effort into their product images than other brands, which is commendable. And they've also got those extreme designs that really make them stand out. I also think the German-sounding name potentially gives viewers a sense of trust and expectations of quality, despite them being wholly Chinese made. So, do I think Stuhrling watches are worth buying? Well, in most situations, I don't think so. While the prices that these are actually selling for aren't outrageously high, and the designs aren't as generic and boring as the likes of Daniel Wellington or Movement, they're still handily outdone by other well-known brands. If you're after a dive watch on Amazon, your money is better spent on an Invicta Pro Diver, Accurist 7037, or Casio Duro MDV 106, all of which are also linked in the video description. The Invicta and Casio have superior finishing and specifications at the same price point, while the Accurist offers similar performance to the Stuhrling, but for far less money and without the marketing jargon. The Aquadiver itself isn't a terrible watch, it's just made obsolete by those alternatives and I'm sure many more. If you can justify shelling out slightly more, you can do even better with the likes of Seiko, Citizen and Orient. The Winchester, on the other hand, is shockingly bad. I think it really reaches for far too much and fails to accomplish it. If you want a watch of that style, I'd recommend heading to Chinese retailer AliExpress. They stock hundreds of skeleton watches with comparable specifications for a fraction of the price. You just have to wait slightly longer for delivery. This Stuhrling is built in China with Chinese parts anyway, so you might as well save some money and shop directly with a Chinese retailer. If you must get a Stuhrling, then buying used is probably the wisest move. From the ground up, I don't like how this company operates. They're giving massive discounts on top of affiliate commissions already, which shows that their watches aren't worth anywhere near their MSRP. While they're not technically posing as German, the name definitely sounds European, as they've cashed in on an elusive watchmaker whose existence we're just supposed to believe in. The other half of their name is original, despite them having loads of homage watches in their repertoire, which are just clones of famous watch designs. Their in-house movement claim might also be false, and it all just feels unnecessarily scummy. I mean, this is just a watch at the end of the day. Why did they need to go to this extent just to ram watches down your throat? Why did they have to run with this fairy tale-like backstory? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. For some viable alternatives, check out the video on screen now, where I run through several watches that are great value under $75. I'd probably take all of those over these Stuhrlings. This video was filmed in-house, by the way. Just thought you should know.